Welcome, I'm Debbie from So Easy. I'm glad that you could join me today, and we're going to be sewing the Date Night Wristlet purse. It's a very simple pattern, and I'm particularly aiming this one at people who are new to sewing, or maybe it's your first bag, so I'm going to take you through it every step of the way. First thing to do is to either get up on your computer or print out the pattern instructions for the bag and follow through with the cutting instructions. You'll typically use two fabrics. I've chosen two that are coordinating, so they've got the same pattern, they're just in different colours. And I'm going to use my red as the outside, and I'm going to use my lime green as the inside, but I'm also going to use the red for the internal dividing pocket. So decide what fabrics to use and cut them all out according to the instructions, and then we'll meet back here and we'll start to put everything together. So these are the two outside panels of the bag, and if you turn over, you can see that I've already added a fusible fleece. Now, if you look carefully, the fleece is cut just a little bit smaller than the outer panel, and the reason for this, I'm going to explain everything because you may be new, is that we don't want the seams of our bag to end up being really stiff and thick that we have to sew through a lot of layers. So therefore, in a lot of patterns you'll find that the fleece and stabilizer is cut a little smaller, and it's exactly the same here. So you take your piece of fleece, cut according to the pattern directions, and then fuse that into the center so that you have a little space around the outside. You've got a quick flash of my finger there. Unfortunately, I've had a bit of a gardening accident, and while everything else looked nice, this one's a right dreadful mess today, so I apologise for that. Hope it's not too distracting. So those are our two outside pieces. The next thing we need to do is take our centre divider. Now this is going to come as one large piece of fabric like this, and you need to take it over to your ironing board and just fold it in half, and you'll fold the larger side down so that your 8.5 inches are across this way. And once you've got your fold just here, then you can see where your centre line is, and again take your piece of fusible fleece and iron that to one side, just lined up just a little bit underneath the fold. And now we're going to do our first piece of sewing. So we're going to fold this over, give it a press to make sure we get a nice smooth line across here, and then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and very carefully I'll do what's called top stitching, and we're just going to stitch quite close to this edge. It's going to be an edge on the bag that's going to be quite visible, so if you can make it nice and even, then your bag will look better in the end. And so you want to make it, you know, depending on how skilled you are with the computer, with the sewing machine, either do it quite close, about 1/8 of an inch, or if you feel a bit more comfortable, a little farther, do about 1/4 of an inch from the way. So I'll go and sew mine now, and then I'll show you what that looks like. So here is my divider piece. It's nice and padded so that it'll be soft inside the bag, and up at the top, just here, I've done my line of top stitching. Mine's around 1/4 of an inch from the edge. I simply lined up the edge of my presser foot along the edge of the fabric like this, and use that as a guide when I sewed this nice straight line. So now we need to take a piece of our lining fabric for the bag, and we're going to add this one on top of the lining fabric like that, and I'm just going to put a few pins to hold it in place. Now our fleece doesn't go all the way to the edge, so we don't have as much thickness around these edges, and therefore it's a little bit easier to put our pins in. Don't need too many. And because later on we're going to be sewing the bag and it'll have quite a few layers, we want to stop the layers shifting about. We want to keep them under control. So we're going to do what's called basting, and we're going to sew within our seam allowance, so quite close to the edge, just down this side, along the bottom here, and up the other side. And this is just going to hold this piece in place against the lining, so later on when we sew, these layers aren't going to shift about too much. So this piece is now completed, and we can also set this piece aside. And now we're going to work on the internal pockets that will hold the cards, whether your ID or credit card or whatever you have. So your piece will start out looking like this, and you'll apply a nice lightweight interfacing to the back. If you need to know more about interfacing, there's a separate article and video, and I will put a link to that so that you can read a little bit more about weights of interfacing. But for this bag it needs to be quite lightweight, so we're not affecting the fabric very much, and I've used a lightweight apparel interfacing for mine. So you take your piece and fold them in half, and you'll do that with 3 of them, so that you'll fold the wrong side to the wrong side, so you have a right side on the outside, and fold it in half and give it a nice press so that you get a nice sharp edge. And you'll do that with 3 of them, and the other one we aren't going to press. So let's work on these 3 to start with, and the same as you edge stitched or top stitched along this seam just here, then we're going to do the same now with all 3 of these. So where you have the folded edge, take that to the sewing machine and sew close to the edge all the way across on each 3 pieces. So our 3 pieces are completed, and we can set those aside. Those are going to be the first pockets for our cards. This bottom pocket we're going to do slightly differently, because if you look back here, these have got a raw edge, and we don't want a raw edge on our bottom pockets, that'll be visible. So we're going to start this one the other way. We're actually going to turn it right sides together, pop a few pins in place, and when we take this over to the machine, we'll sew these raw edges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance just along the bottom, and that's going to create a tube of fabric for us. So now we have our tube of fabric, and where the seam allowance is just here, I'm just going to cut that down around in half, because remember what we said earlier about reducing bulk where we can. I'm going to take out all the unnecessary little bits of fabric, throw that away, and now we need to turn this tube the right way out. It's not too difficult. Should be able to push that through quite easily. Out the other side. Just tidy up those ends. And now if you just roll it a little bit between your fingers, you should be able to flatten that seam on the inside. And then we'll take this over to my ironing board. You can hear my iron there beeping in the background because I've not used it recently. And so I'm going to press this now so that it gets a nice crease along this top edge, the same as the other pieces that we sewed. And once it is pressed to get that nice top edge, I'll also then go and top stitch it so that it matches the other ones. So this last piece is now completed. We have all 4 of our card pockets, and we need to mark now on the other piece of lining fabric where we want our card pockets to come. So you'll need to take a ruler, got a rather oversized one, and from the bottom, if you have a print which is directional, make sure you're marking from the bottom, not the top. And our first line we're going to draw is 3/4 of an inch from the bottom edge. Now I'm using one of these friction pens. Again, I'll put a link underneath. I really love these because you can draw on your fabric wherever you need to. You can make very straight and precise and easy to see lines, and then when you're done you just pop an iron over the top and it disappears. It's also got a little eraser on the end, and you can use that to make your lines disappear too, but an iron is just as easy. So our first one is 3/4 of an inch. Our second one will be 1/2 inch above there. And the difference with this second one is that our piece here already has a seam allowance built in, 1/4 inch, whereas the others don't. So now we're going to go up again another 3/4 of an inch and mark a line. And again one more time, another 3/4 of an inch up, and more, mark a line. And now we can see that we have 4 lines drawn on the fabric. Now it's time for us to stitch these card pockets in place, and we have our original 3 which have the unfinished edge along the bottom, and these are the 3 we're going to start with. So the one that does have the finished edge along the bottom, keep that one back for now, and you just line it up on your fabric so that that bottom edge of the card pocket piece here lines up with the line that you've just drawn. You probably don't need to pin, it depends on how confident you are. You could just put a pin in maybe to start, and then you will sew this piece in place so that the line meets up with the line you've drawn in the fabric, and use a 1/4 inch seam allowance and sew from one side here all the way down to the other side. Remember, this finished edge is the top edge of the pocket, which will be free, and this will be the bottom edge where your cards will sit. So our first pocket is now stitched in place, open at the top, stitched at the bottom, and we've got 2 more. So where you have your next line drawn on the fabric, you line up your next pocket with the bottom even with that line, and again sew this one in place with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then exactly the same with our third one. That one also lines up with the line, gets sewn in place along the bottom, and last but not least we come to our fourth one, the one with the finished edge, and you line up that finished edge with your final line along the bottom of the fabric, and then stitch that bottom one in place too. So now we have all 4 of our pockets stitched in place, but so far they're just one great big pocket. Now if you want to, you can of course leave them that way, but the pattern comes as a design for it to be split in half for card pockets, so I'll do that. Now our piece here is 8.5 inches and we need to find the centre, so that will be 4 1/4, and I'm just going to make a few marks, 4 1/4, 4 1/4, and just draw a line down here, and this will be the centre of the bag, and that's where I'm going to split my pockets. So now I have my line down the centre. I'm going to start from the top of the opening here and sew all the way down to the bottom, and just reinforce with a back stitch at the top and the bottom to hold those pockets securely, and then that's going to provide our central divider. And so here's our central seam sewn, and our pockets on the lining are now completed, so we can set this piece aside, and it's time for us to work on our handle. Let's start on the smaller piece first because that's a little easier to see. So this is our the part of the handle which is going to attach to the bag, and I've pressed it in half like this with the iron so that I've created a center seam, and then as I've opened it out, I've taken the sides, pressed those into the center, so you get a piece like this, and then press that in half again. And what this does, it makes 4 layers of fabric so that it's nice and thick and strong while still being flexible, but those raw edges on the fabric are hidden in the center just there. So do that for your shorter piece, and then go ahead and do the same also for your longer piece of the strap. So our straps are pressed, and it's now time for us to do some more top stitching. Now these pieces are a little bit fiddly, so do be careful and take your time. And you're going to start on this open edge, so where you've folded the 2 together and this edge is open, take this to the sewing machine and sew very close to this edge, trying to stay on the fabric, don't go off the fabric if you can, and do it nice and neatly. And once you've done one side, turn over, and next to the fold, stitch another line of stitching. That'll be your tab done, and then you'll do exactly the same for your longer strap piece. Start on the open folded edge all the way down one side and then all the way down the other. So my 2 straps are now sewn. I've got my small one and my larger one. The small one I can put aside, and the larger one I have my swivel clasp here, and I need to fit this now to the strap. So if you slide on one end and put the strap together. Now I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew backwards and forwards along these 2 sides a couple of times. So around about 1/4 inch, sew backwards and forwards because you want this nice and strong. So sew right from one edge to the other and then back again. I'll show you what that looks like. So here's a close-up of that stitching. You can see I've sewn through all of the layers, and now we've got these rough edges. And I'm just going to cut those off a little bit. There we go, we don't need those. And now to complete the strap, we need to hide those raw edges. So if you take your clasp down to the end like this, and then turn the strap the right way out, we'll just twist this around so that this raw edge is on the inside. And as we do that, if you see how I have pinched that, You see, so I've got the clasp here, the raw edge is also on the inside. And now the same as we sewed through both layers, we're going to do exactly the same again, making sure your strap is nice and even. Take it back to the sewing machine and sew 2 lines of stitches, or if you want to be extra sure, 3 or 4 lines of stitches through here, and that's going to hide that raw edge and keep that clasp nice and securely in place at the end of your strap. So there's our little strap piece now completed, and we can put that to one side. And now we're going to start assembling our bag. So gather together your lining pieces. You've got one with the cards, one with the central pieces, and also gather together your 2 outer pieces. And now we're going to sew in our zip. So when you're starting out sewing bags, sometimes sewing zips into bags can be quite challenging. So for that reason, we've asked you to get a zip which is slightly longer than you need, because you're going to find that a little bit easier. So before we start, if you look on the bottom end of the zip here, you have a zipper stop. And I want you to make a mark which is 1/2 inch from the bottom of that zipper stop, and then cut off any extra. This will help us keep everything nicely lined up. And then if we start assembling our pieces, this is one of my outside panel pieces. If you have a directional print, make sure that it's facing up. And I'll also take one of my lining pieces and make sure that one is also facing up. So I've got my zipper, and we normally sew with things that are right sides together. So this is the right side of my fabric. In terms of my zipper, the side which has the zipper pull on the top is the right side. So those 2 need to go together. So we're going to put them like that. But remember where I had you snip off a little bit from the end of your zipper here? We need to make sure that that end of the zipper tape lines up just here with the edge of the fabric on the right. And then we'll smooth it out so that this top edge of the tape lines up along the top with our fabric. And then we'll take our lining piece, again make sure it's right sides up, and we're going to match it right sides. So that means the good side will match the good side of the bag, and I'm going to put those exactly on top. Now you can use some pins, you can also use clips if you have them. Paper clips or the Clover Wonder clips are brilliant for zips. And I'm just going to put a few in place to make sure I've got everything lined up nicely. And we'll need to switch out now to the zipper foot on your sewing machine so that you can get in nice and close to your zipper as you sew. And now that everything is placed, everything's pinned, and our raw edges are all matching, that 1/2 inch edge of the zipper is at this end of the fabric just here. And we'll take this over to the sewing machine, and using your zipper foot, you'll sew along here, just allowing the zipper foot to run along the coils of the zipper as you go. So our first side is now sewn, and it's time to do the second. So if we open out, that's good, and then we'll open out this way and just give it a little press, and we need to do exactly the same. So we need to match things right sides together. So we've got our zipper here, this is facing right side up, this is the outside of the bag, so we're going to match that again with the outside of the bag. And again, if your print is directional, make sure that they're both facing the right direction. So I'm going to put that one over the top, making sure that this cut end of the zipper tape comes to the corner of my fabric, and the raw edges there are going to be matching. Let's turn that over, you get a better view that way. And then I'm also going to take the lining, and this is the lining, so is this one, and they're going to be right sides up and right sides facing. So this one goes down over the top. So you have your outer fabric, then the zipper lined up with the fabric here, and then the lining matches again. So we can start by matching in this corner with a pin. And as we match them all the way along, we'll keep all of those edges even. It's not easy with a great big plaster on my finger, but I'm sure we can do it. And there we are, pin number 4. So now this goes back to the sewing machine, again with the zipper foot. we're going to sew along this edge now, and then our zipper will be in place. So our zipper is now sewn in place, but before we go any further, let's double check that we've got everything correctly. If I face the bag so that the outer fabrics are facing up, both of them are orientated so the top would be towards the zipper. The zipper is also on the top, so the pull's this way up and the zipper works. If I turn over to the back, the lining fabrics are both face up and the pockets are both open to the zipper. And if that's the case, then you've sewn everything correctly. Good. So let's move on to looking at some top stitching for our zipper. If you just give these a little pull, what we want to see is a nice clear line down the back of our zip just here that you can run your finger up and down, where the lining fabric isn't going to get stuck when we operate our zipper. And exactly the same on the front, just pull them slightly away. And we'll take this over to the ironing board now and just give it a press. So as you press, just slightly pull the fabric pieces away from the zipper so that they're sitting nice and smooth front and back. And then we'll come back and look at how to top stitch them. So I've pressed the bag and now I've gone ahead and top stitched. Let's have a look at that in some detail. If I bring that up to the camera just here, you can see that there are now 2 rows of stitching close to the zip, here and here, running next to the zip, and this creates a nice smooth even an open area here on the front and also on the back too. So now our lining won't get caught. So go ahead and do the same for yours, still using your zipper foot. Sew a nice line of stitches down this side and then along the other side too. And now we need to start assembling the bag. So we're almost there. We need to get together our little tab. So I've got my strap with the clip, and then my tab is going to have a ring. So I'll slide that in place now and just fold it over. You can use a ring or a D-ring, or you could even just leave it out altogether and snap your clip straight onto the piece of fabric if you wanted to. I've got a nice ring for mine, so I'm going to just get that together, put that to one side. And now we need to take our pieces of fabric, and the 2 right sides are going to get folded together. And as we lift it up, the 2 lining pieces get folded together. But actually it's going to be a little bit more complicated than that, because you may have seen when people tend to sew a zipper pouch, there are a lot of tutorials for how to do a basic zipper pouch, but a lot of the time when people turn them out, they get kind of dented or rounded corners, and I want to give you the best opportunity to get a nice corner. So let's have a look at that. Let's open the bag and put it basically inside out. So I've got my zip on the top. This is the inside of the zip just here, and these are my lining pieces. And if you look, everything is lying nice and smooth, and we want it to lie as far as possible like this when we open the bag and turn it the other way. And what I found the easiest way to do that is if you look on the ends just here. When we have the bag like this, everything is facing towards the bottom of the bag. So our zip and the teeth are on the top, the zipper tape is pointing towards the bottom, all the seam allowances, they're all pointing towards the bottom of the bag. So when we sew, we ideally want it to be sewn exactly like this, but of course we can't sew it like this because we have to sew our lining and our outer separate. So let's have a way that let's have a look at a way that we can do that and hopefully still get a nice neat finish. So let's have a look at how we're going to achieve this nice neat corner if we can in detail. I've undone the zipper pull on the bag most of the way, and these are our 2 right sides, so I'm still going to fold those together. In fact, I'm going to fold everything just as we had it just now. So we've got the linings on the outside, everything's lined up here. We've got our zipper at the top. It's open now, so the teeth are facing upwards, and we want everything to remain as it is. So what I'm going to do is at the zipper just here, we have a little bit of zipper tape which comes above the lining fabric. So I'm going to put a pin in there. So that's going to keep the teeth facing in the right direction, keep all of our layers of fabric the right way. We want them all facing towards the bottom. So I've done that on that side. Let me go over to this other side, and I'm going to do exactly the same. So I've got everything folded as I want it, and I'm just going to put a pin up at the top here underneath those zipper teeth. It's a little bit tricky. Here we are. It's easier if I put it right on the end, on that last ½ inch that we have. Okay, so we want everything under these pins to stay where they are, except for our lining fabric, which needs to go the other side. So if I place that now down on the bench, and the lining fabric comes up, I turn it over, and our lining fabric comes up. And that's, in theory, all there is now to it, because we've kept all of our other layers exactly as we want them. So our zip is still lined up beautifully here. All of our seam allowances, the zipper tape, etc. is all pointing towards the bottom of the bag. So I can just go around now and add in a few more pins where we need them. So I'll do this part here first of all. This is the outer of our bag. So I'll just pop a few pins here. So everything now below these pins that we set earlier is exactly as it should be. Now we've got our lining pieces of fabric. So I'm just going to double check. My pins are fine. Everything below the pin is good. So now I'm just going to take some pins around my layers in my lining fabric too. These are a bit thicker, these layers, because of the little pockets and things that we've added in. So now I'll do the same on the other side. Just put a pin just here, one in this bottom corner. And we have to remember that we need to leave a gap in our lining. So I'm just going to put a couple of pins here and here. And then I will remember not to sew this part of the lining closed. So that's now the outer, the bag all pinned in place as it should be. And I'm hoping with these pins at the points in the zipper just here that I'm going to keep everything nice and trim and exactly in place as it should be when I sew. So now we're going to take it over to the sewing machine. We need to leave our gap here. So start at one point, sew to the corner, around, over the zipper here, all the way around the outside, along the bottom, until you get to the point just here. And then we'll have sewn everything together and left a gap. Going to use a small 1/4 inch seam allowance. Oh, got so excited about getting those good corners on the bag, I forgot to mention our little tab. So this tab needs to be sewn in at this point, and we need to pull it between the layers of the outer of the bag. So those are the ones with the fleece. And I'm thinking that the best part for your wrist strap would be for it to be the end where your zipper pull is, to make it easier to undo your zipper, but it's entirely up to you. You can either put it at the end where the pull is or the opposite end. And we need to do it so that it's pointing inside the bag. So where my zipper is here, these are the outer pieces. I'm just going to take that pin out and slide this in where I want it, probably around about 1 inch, I would say, down from that zipper pull. That seems about right there. And pop in a pin. It's kind of thick, so I'm going to make sure that I pin it on both sides. Nearly caught me out there. And they missed that entirely. And I'm leaving these little ends pointing out a little bit, because then I can see where it is, and I can make sure as I come up to it that I'm keeping these ends nice and square, that they aren't going to be off at a funny angle to the side seam. Okay, so I think that's now everything. We have our little tab in place and we're now ready to sew. So now to help us turn our bag, we need to just do a little bit of trimming. Where we've got this thick area here, I'm just going to trim off that extra, because we don't need that little bit now. That was just as a guide for us. Those bits are gone. Also going to trim off the end of the zip, because we don't need those bits either. And to help turn the bag and get nice neat corners on the bottom, we're just going to trim a little bit off of these corners. Again, it just reduces some of the bulk in these seams. So I'll do that on all 4 corners of the bag. Careful to cut not through that stitching that you've just carefully done. Don't want to make a hole in the bottom, do we, after all? Okay, and I've got a little bit of bulk in this side seam, so I'm just going to remove some of that extra there. Same on this side where we've got all those pockets. I'm just going to cut a little bit away. Okay, I think we're nearly ready. There's one more thing we need to do. Get away all those little bits. And where we have our bottom seam in the lining here, we've left it open, but we're going to want to turn and stitch this eventually, and it's going to be easier now if we take this over to the ironing board and just press that seam back. So where on the sides here you have your seams already sewn, if you use that as a guide, turn back the pieces of fabric in a nice straight line and press them to the outside. So now comes our moment of truth. We're going to turn our bag right side out and hopefully it's going to look great. So if I reach inside, I'm just going to make sure now that the zipper is open all the way. I'm going to reach for that far corner, grab it and pull it out through the hole in the bottom of the lining. Once I've got that, I can gradually work everything through, combination of pushing and pulling. And the whole bag is going to turn through this gap in the bottom. Once it's turned once, of course it's still inside out. So I've got my hand down on the inside. I'm just going to use my finger to get nice sharp corners in at the bottom of the bag. Check that's in there nice and securely, which it is. If it isn't, there's still plenty of time for you to go back and take care of that now if it's a little bit not on straight or if it's not quite caught. Do that corner here, get my finger through down to this other corner. So this is the outer of the bag, this red part. I want to make sure it's looking good. And get my finger down in that corner too. If you have some kind of tool, there's a tool called a purple fang, you can use that, or a chopstick, just your finger. Okay, so the outside of the bag is looking good. Now we've got our inside. I'm going to do the same just temporarily with these corners. I know they're going to face the other way, but we need to just close the gap in the bottom just here. So now you can either take this over to the sewing machine and stitch this opening closed, or if you prefer you can stitch it by hand and you'll get a nice neat finish. See where this gap is? I'm going to close that now, and we've got those pressed edges to help us. So I'll do that and then we'll finish turning our bag. So I've turned our bag the right way out. Our corners are by no means square and perfect, but I think we've done a pretty good job. So now all we need to do, attach your wrist strap onto the side of the bag just here, and then open up. I've added a few cards already. You can also use these spaces to add some notes or cash if you want to. Slide in your lippy, a pen, a notepad, whatever you need, and your telephone, and you are ready to go on your date. Thank you very much for sewing this pattern. I hope you've enjoyed making it and picked up a few tips and tricks along the way, and I hope you'll consider following along with Sew So Easy and sewing some more in future. Thank you very much.